This happened to me 3 winters ago when I was living in northern Ontario, about 40 minutes outside of Sydney. I've never told anyone the full story because honestly, I don't think anyone would believe me, but I need to get this out there, even if just to remind myself that it was real. I worked as a surveyor for a logging company, which meant spending a lot of time alone in the Canadian wilderness. It was December, and we were scouting new areas for a spring operation. My supervisor asked me to drive out to a remote section of Crown land to take some measurements and photographs. The area was accessible by an old logging road that hadn't been maintained in years. I left early that morning, around 5, hoping to get the work done before sunset. December days are short, that far north, and I didn't want to be out there after dark. The drive took longer than expected. The road was covered in ice and snow, and several times I had to get out and clear fallen branches. By the time I reached the coordinates, it was already 2 in the afternoon. The sky was that heavy gray color that meant more snow was coming. I worked quickly, taking my measurements and photographs, but the light was fading faster than I anticipated. Around 4:30, the snow started falling. Not gentle flakes, but thick, heavy snow that reduced visibility to almost nothing. I knew I needed to leave immediately, but when I got back to my truck, it wouldn't start. The battery was completely dead. I'd left the interior light on by accident, and in that cold, it had drained within hours. I had no cell service. I was at least 40 kilometers from the nearest town. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and I knew that staying in the truck overnight without heat could be fatal. I had survival gear, but not enough to safely wait out a night in minus 30-degree weather. That's when I noticed the cabin. It was about 200 meters off the road, barely visible through the trees. I hadn't seen it earlier, but there it was. A small wooden structure with a single window facing my direction. There was no smoke coming from the chimney, no lights, no vehicle. It looked abandoned. I gathered my emergency kit and started walking toward it. The snow was already up to my knees in places. Every step was exhausting. As I got closer, I noticed something strange about the cabin. The door was painted red, a deep, almost blood-colored red that stood out against the gray wood and white snow. There were symbols carved into the frame around the door. They looked old, worn down by weather, but I couldn't recognize them. I knocked. No answer. I tried the door, and it opened easily. Inside, the cabin was sparse, but not empty. There was a wood-burning stove, a small bed frame with a bare mattress, and a table with 2 chairs. Everything was covered in a thin layer of frost. It looked like no one had been there in months, maybe years. But here's the thing that still bothers me. The firewood next to the stove was freshly cut. The edges weren't weathered at all. I didn't have time to think about it. I needed warmth. I started a fire, and within an hour, the small cabin was almost comfortable. The storm outside was getting worse. Wind howled through gaps in the walls. I could hear tree branches cracking in the forest. I ate some of my emergency rations and tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Something felt wrong about the place. The shadows seemed to move strangely in the firelight. Every time the wind shifted, I thought I heard something beneath it. Something that sounded almost like breathing. Around midnight, I heard the first knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the red door. I froze. I was in the middle of nowhere, in a blizzard. No one should have been out there. No one could have been out there. I didn't answer. I didn't move. The knocking came again. 3 knocks. Same rhythm. Same pause between each one. I stood up slowly, quietly, and moved toward the window. The frost on the glass was too thick to see through. I used my sleeve to clear a small circle and pressed my face against the cold glass. There was nothing outside. Just snow and darkness. I went back to my spot by the stove, telling myself it was just a branch hitting the cabin, but the knocking came again. This time, it was coming from the wall behind me. 3 knocks. The same exact pattern. Then from the floor beneath me. 3 knocks. Then from directly above, from the ceiling. 3 knocks. All around the cabin, from every direction. The same 3 knocks repeated. Not all at once, but in sequence. Like whatever was making the sound was circling the structure, getting Delete. I grabbed the axe I'd seen by the firewood and backed into the corner farthest from the door. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. The fire crackled. The wind howled, and then I heard something that made my blood freeze. A voice. Soft, almost a whisper, coming from just outside the door. You lit the fire. You called me home. It was a woman's voice, but there was something wrong with it. It sounded like it was coming from underwater, or from very far away, even though it was right outside. Open the door. Let me in. It's so cold out here. Every instinct told me not to respond. I pressed myself harder against the wall, gripping the axe so tightly my hands ached. The voice came again, but this time it was different. It sounded like my mother. My mother, who had passed away 5 years earlier. Sweetheart, please. I'm freezing. Why won't you let me in? I felt tears streaming down my face, but I didn't move. I knew, somehow, that whatever was outside was not my mother, that it couldn't be my mother. But it sounded exactly like her. Every inflection, every little quirk of her voice was perfect. The knocking started again, but this time it was violent. The whole cabin shook with each impact. The door rattled in its frame. The red paint seemed to glow in the firelight. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The knocking. The voice. Even the wind seemed to die down. I stood there in that corner until dawn, not moving, barely breathing. When the first gray light of morning came through the window, I opened the door and looked outside. There were no footprints in the snow. None except my own from the night before, already half buried. But on the door, on that red door, there were scratches, deep gouges in the wood, like something with claws had tried to tear its way through. I walked back to my truck in a daze. Somehow, impossibly, it started on the first try. I drove straight back to town and never told anyone what happened. A month later, I looked up the area on old survey maps. There was no cabin listed at those coordinates. There never had been. When I drove back out there in the spring, just to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined it, there was nothing. No cabin, no clearing. Just dense, unbroken forest. Sometimes, when the wind blows a certain way in winter, I still hear 3 knocks. My cousin worked as a security guard at an old hospital in Manila. Not one of the modern ones, but San Lazaro Hospital, the one that had been around since the Spanish colonial era. He worked the night shift for almost 2 years before he quit, and the story he told me about why he left still keeps me awake sometimes. The hospital had a reputation among the staff. Everyone knew there were certain areas you didn't go to alone after midnight. Certain rooms that were kept locked, not because of maintenance issues, but because of things that couldn't be explained. The older guards would warn the new ones, but most people thought it was just hazing. My cousin was one of them. He was assigned to the East Wing, which housed the older wards that weren't used anymore. Budget cuts had closed them down, but the building was still connected to the main hospital. His job was to patrol the empty hallways, check the locks, and make sure no one had broken in. For the first few months, nothing happened. The building was creepy, sure, with its peeling paint and flickering lights, but it was just an old building. My cousin would walk his rounds, listen to music on his phone, and count down the hours until his shift ended. Then he started noticing things. It began with sounds. Footsteps in hallways he'd just walked through. Doors closing softly, somewhere in the dark. The sound of someone crying, very faint, coming from rooms that had been empty for decades. He told himself it was the building settling, or homeless people sneaking in, or his imagination playing tricks on him. But then he saw the woman. It was around 3 in the morning. He was doing his rounds on the 4th floor, the one that used to be the children's ward. He turned a corner and saw someone standing at the far end of the hallway. A woman in a white dress, facing away from him. She was completely still, standing in front of a window. He called out to her, thinking maybe she was a lost patient from the main hospital. She didn't respond. He started walking toward her, his flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. He was maybe 10 meters away when she turned around. He couldn't see her face. The hallway was dark, and his flashlight wasn't strong enough to illuminate her clearly. But he could see that where her face should have been, there was nothing. Just smooth, pale skin. No eyes. No nose. No mouth. My cousin ran. He didn't stop until he reached the security office on the ground floor. He told his supervisor what he'd seen, but the older man just nodded sadly, like he'd heard this story before. "That's the lady of the 4th floor," he said. "She's been here longer than any of us. Just don't look at her too long, and whatever you do, don't let her get too close." My cousin wanted to quit that night, but he needed the money. He had a wife and a baby daughter at home. Jobs were hard to find, so he kept working, but he stopped going to the 4th floor. He'd mark it as checked on his report, but stay on the lower levels. It worked for a while. Weeks passed without incident. He started to think maybe it had been a hallucination or a prank by the other guards. He started to relax. Then the woman came to him. He was in the basement, checking the old storage rooms. The basement was actually one of the less scary parts of the building because it was so ordinary, just filing cabinets and old equipment. Nothing special. He was walking past a row of shelves when his flashlight flickered. When it came back on, she was standing in front of him. He couldn't move, couldn't scream. She was so close he could see the texture of her skin, smooth and white like porcelain. She was wearing a nurse's uniform, he realized, but an old one, from maybe 50 or 60 years ago, and she was tilting her head, slowly, like she was studying him. Then she raised her hand. My cousin described what happened next as the worst moment of his life. She reached toward his face, and as her fingers got closer, he felt cold spreading through his body. Not just physical cold, but something deeper, like all the warmth and hope and life was being drained out of him. He managed to close his eyes. He remembered something his grandmother told him as a child, that if you can't see them, they have less power over you. So he squeezed his eyes shut and started praying. Every prayer he could remember. The Our Father, the Hail Mary prayers he hadn't said since he was a boy. The cold stopped getting worse. It didn't go away, but it stopped spreading. He kept praying, kept his eyes closed for what felt like hours. When he finally opened them, he was alone. But something had changed. For the next few weeks, my cousin felt like he was being watched constantly, not just at work, but at home. He would wake up in the middle of the night and see a shadow in the corner of his bedroom. His baby daughter would stare at empty spaces and cry. His wife said the house felt wrong, heavy, like something was pressing down on them. He went to a priest, then to an abulalio, a traditional healer. They both told him the same thing. Something had attached itself to him. Something from the hospital. They performed rituals, gave him blessed objects, but nothing worked completely. Finally, he quit his job. He didn't give notice, didn't collect his last paycheck. He just stopped going. His family moved to a different city, far from Manila. It took almost a year, but slowly, things went back to normal. The shadows went away. His daughter stopped crying at night. The heaviness lifted, but he told me that sometimes, even now, he'll be walking somewhere and catch a glimpse of a woman in white at the edge of his vision. When he turns to look, there's no one there. He never went back to that hospital. He said he never will. Some places, he told me, have things living in them that shouldn't be disturbed. And some of those things, once they notice you, never really let go. I'm American, but my grandmother was from Mexico. She lived in a small town outside of Guanajuato, and every summer when I was growing up, my family would drive down to visit her. This story is about the last trip we ever took. I was 19, old enough to do some of the driving. My father and I were taking shifts behind the wheel while my mother slept in the back seat. We'd crossed the border at Laredo and were making good time through the desert. We decided to drive through the night to avoid the worst of the heat. My father took the first shift, and I slept until around 2 in the morning when he woke me up. He was exhausted, barely keeping his eyes open, so I took over while he passed out in the passenger seat. The highway was empty, miles of nothing but scrubland and darkness, with occasional small towns that were just clusters of light in the distance. I had the radio on low, some Mexican station playing old ballads. Around 3, I saw someone on the side of the road. This wasn't unusual. Even in the middle of nowhere, you'd sometimes see people walking, hitchhiking, or just standing around. But something about this person made me slow down. It was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She was standing perfectly still on the shoulder of the highway, wearing a white dress that looked like a communion gown. She was alone. I pulled over about 50 meters past her, thinking she must be lost or in trouble. My father woke up and asked what was wrong. I told him about the girl, and he immediately tensed up. "Keep driving," he said. "Dad, she's just a kid. She's alone out here. Keep driving." Now. There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Real fear. But I couldn't just leave a child on the side of the highway in the middle of the night. I got out of the car and started walking back toward her. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't move, didn't respond. As I got closer, I could see that her dress was dirty, stained with something dark. Her hair was hanging in front of her face. I was maybe 10 feet away when my father grabbed my arm. I hadn't heard him get out of the car. "Look at her feet," he whispered. "Primera, look down." The girl's feet weren't touching the ground. She was floating, just a few inches above the dirt, completely motionless. My father pulled me back toward the car. I couldn't look away from the girl. And then she lifted her head. Her face was wrong. The features were all there. Eyes, nose, mouth. But they were arranged incorrectly, like a child's drawing of a face. Her eyes were too far apart, her mouth too wide. And she was smiling. We ran. I've never moved so fast in my life. My father practically threw me into the passenger seat and got behind the wheel. The tire screamed as he floored the accelerator. I looked in the rearview mirror. The girl was in the middle of the road now, still smiling that terrible smile. And she was getting closer, not walking or running, just gliding toward us, her feet never touching the ground. She was moving faster than the car. My mother woke up screaming. She'd seen it too. My father drove like a madman, taking the car up to speeds I didn't think it could reach. The girl kept pace with us for what felt like miles. In the mirror, I could see her face getting clearer, larger, closer. That smile never changed. Then we passed a small shrine on the side of the road, one of those little roadside memorials you see everywhere in Mexico, with candles and flowers and a cross. The moment we passed it, the girl stopped. She just stopped, standing in the middle of the highway, that smile finally fading. We kept driving until we couldn't see her anymore. We didn't stop again until sunrise. We pulled into a gas station in some small town, and my father went inside without saying a word. He came back with a bottle of holy water and made all of us drink from it. Later, he told me what he knew. His mother, my grandmother, had told him stories about the roads of Guanajuato, about spirits that appeared to travelers at night, spirits of children who had died violently and were trapped between worlds. They would try to lure travelers off the road, or into accidents, or into following them into the darkness. Some people who encountered them never came back. Others came back wrong. The communion dress was the sign. My futter side. Some of the spirits wore the clothes they'd been buried in. The girl we saw had probably been dead for decades. We made it to my grandmother's town that afternoon. When we told her what happened, she didn't seem surprised. She just nodded and lit candles for us, saying prayers in a mix of Spanish and something older, words I didn't recognize. "She let you go," my grandmother said finally. "Be grateful. Not everyone is so lucky." That was the last summer I visited Mexico. My grandmother passed away the following year, and we never went back. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I think I see a figure in white at the edge of my headlights. I never stop, I never slowed down, and I never, ever look in the rearview mirror.